During the horror movie, she got scared and jumped into his arms. Only later did she realize the man who embraced her was a famous millionaire. The unexpected encounter sparked sighs and stares from everyone in the cinema. That scare forever changed the life of the humble young woman. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Let's continue. The aroma of fresh bread wafted through the narrow streets of Oak Ridge neighborhood when Emily crossed the threshold of Flavor & Co. Bakery at 5:30 in the morning. The sky still maintained shades of deep blue, and the first lights of day had barely begun to awaken the city. Her brown hair, tied in a messy bun, betrayed the haste with which she had gotten ready to avoid being late. While putting on the white apron with the bakery's faded logo, Emily observed Mr. Joe, the baker, who had been working tirelessly since 3 in the morning. The 60-year-old man with flour even on his graying eyebrows was like a father to her. He was the one who gave her a chance when she needed it most 3 years ago, even without any experience. "Good morning, Mr. Joe. Need help organizing the shelves?" asked Emily, trying to disguise the fatigue in her eyes. The previous night had been long, divided between caring for Grandma Rose and finalizing a few more pages of her secret comic book. "No need, girl. Go prepare the register, because customers will start arriving any minute," he responded, with that kind smile he had carried since the first day. Emily methodically organized the bills and coins in the drawer of the old cash register, the one that sometimes jammed and needed a special touch to open. Her fingers, slightly stained with ink from the night before, slid with familiarity over the worn keys. Between one activity and another, her mind wandered to the sketchbook hidden under her bed where heroes and heroines lived, adventures very different from her reality. The first customer of the day was always Mrs. Wilmer, a 75-year-old lady who came to buy fresh French bread and took the opportunity to catch up on neighborhood gossip. "Emily, you won't believe what happened to Kathy's daughter," she would begin, while Emily carefully weighed the bread. Morning hours passed between cordial smiles, calculated change, and the constant coming and going of customers. During the quieter moments, Emily found herself sketching small drawings in the margins of the order pad, creating characters that quickly escaped from her imagination onto paper. Around 10 in the morning, when customer traffic decreased, she took the opportunity to make some coffee. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the cup, a reflection of sleepless nights. The worry about overdue bills and her grandmother's treatment weighed on her shoulders like an invisible burden, but Emily refused to show it. "Honey, you're paler than bread dough today," commented Mrs. Nancy, the pastry chef, placing a piece of carrot cake in front of her. "Eat a little, it'll do you good." Emily smiled gratefully, but her stomach was tied in knots. The night before, she had found another yellow envelope under the door, another hospital bill. The bakery's salary barely covered the basics, and Grandma Rose's medications consumed a good portion of what was left. Between one customer and another, Emily allowed herself small moments of daydreaming. She imagined her comics being published, people getting emotional over her characters, a life where she didn't have to choose between buying medicine or paying rent. But soon reality called her back, in the form of another customer or a new batch of bread that needed to be arranged on the shelves. The day followed its normal course until, close to lunchtime, something different happened. A man she had never seen before entered the bakery. He wasn't just any man. There was something about his posture, the way his eyes surveyed the environment, that distinguished him from regular customers. He wore simple clothes, but Emily, accustomed to observing details for her drawings, noticed the discreet but elegant watch on his wrist and the impeccable cut of his shirt. He approached the counter with a gentle smile, one of those that reaches the eyes, and ordered an espresso. Emily couldn't explain why, but her hands trembled a little more than usual while operating the coffee machine. There was something familiar about that face, as if she had seen him somewhere before, but couldn't remember where. Saturday dawned gray and rainy, the kind that invites coziness and introspection. Emily had saved some coins for weeks for this special moment, a session at the Palace Theatre, the only street cinema that still remained in the neighborhood. The place, despite its peeling paint and worn seats, held a particular magic that transported her to other worlds. After making sure Grandma Rose was comfortable, with her medications taken and under the care of neighbor Mrs. Fay, Emily allowed herself this small luxury. She arrived at the cinema drenched, but her eyes sparkled with expectation. The film showing was Shadows of the Past, a suspense story that promised surprises in every scene. The entrance hall still maintained traces of its former grandeur, with its Art Deco chandeliers and vintage posters framed on the walls. The smell of popcorn mingled with the peculiar aroma of history and nostalgia that only old cinemas possess. Emily bought her ticket from the lady at the booth, who seemed as much a part of the place as the walls themselves. The screening room was practically empty, except for a few scattered spectators. Emily chose a seat in the middle, her favorite position to appreciate both the screen and the architectural details of the ceiling, which featured faded paintings of classic cinema muses. As the lights began to dim, a man sat quietly in the seat next to her. In the darkness, Emily merely registered his discreet presence, concentrating on the first scenes of the film that began to unfold on the big screen. The narrative became increasingly tense, with unexpected twists and moments of growing suspense. During a particularly frightening scene, Emily, overcome by fear, instinctively grabbed the arm of the stranger beside her. The next moment, realizing what she had done, she felt her face burn with embarrassment. "I'm sorry," she whispered quickly, withdrawing her hand. It was then that their eyes met in the darkness of the cinema, and she recognized the mysterious customer from the bakery. He smiled in a way that made her heart skip a beat. "Don't worry," he replied, in a low and reassuring voice. I was startled by that scene too. The rest of the film passed like a blur in Emily's mind. She was extremely conscious of his presence beside her, of the subtle perfume that emanated from his clothes, of the way his fingers gently drummed on the armrest during the more tense scenes. When the lights came on, Emily finally got a better look at him. He wore casual clothes, but there was something about his posture that suggested a natural elegance. His eyes were a deep brown and conveyed a calmness that contrasted with the surrounding environment. "You work at Flavor & Co. Bakery, don't you?" he asked, as they both rose from their seats. "The coffee you made the other day was excellent." Emily felt her cheeks flush again. "Yes, I work there. What a coincidence meeting you here." "Sometimes the best coincidences happen in the most unlikely places," he replied with an enigmatic smile. "By the way, my name is Ethan." "Emily," she responded, nervously tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. They walked together to the exit of the cinema, where the rain was still falling gently. Ethan offered to share his umbrella to the bus stop, but Emily politely declined, claiming she needed to stop at the pharmacy before returning home. "Then I'll see you at the bakery," he said, with an expression Emily couldn't decipher. There was something more in that look, something she couldn't fully understand. As she walked along the wet sidewalk, Emily couldn't help but smile. That casual encounter had brought a touch of magic to her rainy Saturday. But she couldn't imagine that this seemingly simple moment would be the beginning of a much bigger story that was about to unfold in her life. Monday arrived with a different expectation in the air. Emily tried to focus on her usual tasks at the bakery, but her thoughts insisted on returning to the encounter at the cinema. Each time the doorbell rang, her heart gave a little jump, hoping to see Ethan entering with his enigmatic smile. It was only late in the afternoon, when the sky began to take on orange hues, that he appeared. He wore a light blue shirt and dark pants, with that same discreet elegance that had caught her attention from the first moment. Emily felt her hands sweat slightly as he approached the counter. "Good afternoon, Emily," he greeted, pronouncing her name as if it were a precious word. "That espresso was so good that I couldn't resist coming back." Mrs. Nancy, who was decorating a cake near the counter, raised her eyes with interest, clearly curious about the customer who knew the young attendant's name. Emily could feel the confectioner's gaze burning into her back as she prepared the coffee. "So, do you always frequent the Palace Theatre?" asked Ethan while waiting for his drink. There was something in his voice that suggested genuine interest, different from the superficial cordiality of other customers. "Whenever I can," Emily replied, adjusting the coffee machine. "It's one of the few places where I can still disconnect." A bit from reality. The words escaped before she could contain them, more sincere than she intended to be with an almost stranger. Ethan nodded, understanding. I perfectly understand. Sometimes we need these moments of escape, don't we? Life can be quite intense. There was something about the way he said intense that made Emily look up, meeting his gaze. For a moment, it seemed that he too carried his own burdens, hidden beneath that calm appearance. The moment was interrupted by Mr. Joe, who emerged from the oven area with a fresh batch of cheese bread. The delicious aroma filled the environment, and some customers approached, attracted by the smell. "Want to try some?" offered Emily, indicating the cheese bread. "It's Mr. Joe's specialty." Ethan accepted, and as he savored the treat, his eyes traveled around the bakery with an interest that seemed to go beyond simple customer curiosity. Emily observed him discreetly, noting how he seemed to absorb every detail. The old shelves, the glass counter with small cracks, the fan that lazily spun on the ceiling. "This place has something special," he commented after a moment. "A soul, of its own." Emily smiled, surprised that he had perceived exactly what she always felt about the bakery. "Yes, it really does. Despite all the difficulties." She interrupted herself, biting her lip. She didn't want to talk about the bakery's financial problems, about how Mr. Joe struggled to keep the bills paid, about the equipment that needed urgent maintenance. Ethan seemed to notice her hesitation. "Sometimes the most special places are those that face the greatest battles to continue existing," he said, with a wisdom that seemed beyond his age. At that moment, his cell phone vibrated. Ethan checked it quickly, and a shadow passed over his face. "I need to go," he said, leaving a generous tip on the counter. The coffee was excellent, as always. After he left, Mrs. Nancy approached with a mischievous smile. So that's the reason for your different smile today." "He's very elegant, Emily, and polite too." Emily shook her head, trying to disguise the blush rising to her cheeks. "He's just a customer, Mrs. Nancy." "A customer who already knows your name and who looks at you as if you were the only person in the world," the confectioner teased, raising an eyebrow. Sure. At night, at home, while taking care of Grandma Rose, Emily couldn't stop thinking about Ethan. There was something about him that intrigued her deeply. The way he spoke, as if he carefully chose each word. The way he observed everything around him, as if he were memorizing every detail, and especially that look that sometimes seemed to carry a secret. Sitting at her small drawing desk, improvised in a corner of the room, Emily began to doodle distractedly. Under her pencil, a character that vaguely resembled Ethan began to take shape. But in her drawing, he was a mysterious hero, guardian of some important secret. She smiled to herself, realizing how her imagination had already begun to weave stories about him. The sound of coughing coming from the room next door brought her back to reality. Grandma Rose needed her nighttime medications. Emily put away her sketchbook and stood up, sighing. As much as her mind wanted to fly into romantic fantasies, the reality of her responsibilities always called her back. In the weeks that followed, Ethan's visits to the bakery became more frequent. Always in the late afternoon, always with that same enigmatic air that so intrigued Emily. The employees already knew him by name, and Mr. Joe would even start preparing the espresso as soon as he saw him crossing the street. On a particularly busy afternoon, while Emily was organizing a new shipment of products on the shelves, a conversation caught her attention. Two ladies, known neighborhood frequenters, were whispering near the pastry display. "Did you see the photo in the magazine? It looks just like him," whispered one of them, showing something on her cell phone to her friend. "It can't be the same person. What would a man of that level be doing here in our neighborhood?" replied the other, casting a furtive glance in Emily's direction. Curious, Emily tried to approach discreetly, but the ladies quickly changed the subject. That wasn't the only time she noticed whispers and strange looks when Ethan was around. There was something about him that people seemed to recognize, but couldn't exactly identify what. That same afternoon, while cleaning the counter, Emily found a business card fallen near the spot where Ethan usually sat. There was no name, just the initials, EM, in elegant golden letters, and the logo of a company she vaguely recognized, one of the largest business conglomerates in the country. The card burned in her pocket when Ethan appeared, punctually at 5:30 as usual. Emily hesitated, torn, between returning the card and pretending she hadn't found it. Something told her that this small piece of paper held more secrets than it appeared. "Everything okay, Emily? You seem worried today," he commented, noticing her thoughtful expression. "Everything's fine," she replied, forcing a smile. "It's just, there's something I need to return to you." When she took the card out of her pocket, she noticed a subtle change in Ethan's expression. For a moment, a shadow passed over his eyes, so quickly that Emily almost believed she had imagined it. "Oh, that... thank... you," he said, quickly pocketing the card. "I hadn't even noticed I had lost it." The silence that followed was different from others they had shared before. It was loaded with unasked questions, untold truths. "Emily," Mr. Joe's voice called from the kitchen, "can you come here for a moment?" When she returned minutes later, Ethan had already left, leaving only the payment for the coffee and a folded note under the cup. Not everything is what it seems, but some things are exactly what the heart says they are. At home, while helping Grandma Rose with dinner, Emily couldn't stop thinking about the enigmatic note. Her grandmother, always perceptive despite her age and illness, noticed her distraction. "What smile is that, dear?" "You look like you're floating," commented Grandma Rose with that shrewd look that always saw beyond appearances. Emily hesitated for a moment, but ended up telling her grandmother about Ethan, about his visits to the bakery, about the mysterious card. As she spoke, she noticed that Grandma Rose became strangely quiet, her wrinkled fingers slightly squeezing the napkin. "Did you say EM?" asked the elderly woman, with a voice Emily had never heard before. "And this young man? What appears he like?" Emily described Ethan in detail, and with each word, she saw something different emerge in her grandmother's eyes, a mixture of recognition, concern, and something else she couldn't identify. "Grandma, are you okay? Do you know him from somewhere?" Grandma Rose seemed to wake from a distant reverie. "No, my dear. It's just that sometimes the past has a funny way of coming back to visit us." That night, after her grandmother fell asleep, Emily found herself unable to sleep. She sat at her drawing desk and began working on a new comic. This time, it was about a young woman who discovered that the people in her life weren't exactly who they appeared to be. As she drew, she couldn't help but think that perhaps her own life was turning into a story as intriguing as those she created in her notebook. The next day, the mysterious reaction from Grandma Rose still disturbed Emily's thoughts. Taking advantage of the fact that her grandmother had gone to the doctor, accompanied by Mrs. Fay, she decided to investigate the small attic of the house where they kept old boxes of mementos that she had never had the courage to rummage through. The space was tight and dusty, with cobwebs decorating the corners of the low ceiling. The weak light that entered through the only circular window created dancing shadows on the peeling walls. Emily sneezed several times while moving old boxes, some already yellowed by time. It was in one of these boxes, hidden beneath several others, that she found something intriguing, an old photo album with a cracked leather cover. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the yellowed pages, and her heart almost stopped when she saw the first photograph. It was a black and white image, showing an imposing mansion. In front of it, a group of people posed elegantly, and among them, Emily recognized her grandmother, much younger, wearing a housekeeper's uniform. But what really caught her attention was the name handwritten at the bottom of the photo: Mitchell Residence, East Wing Inauguration, 1985. Mitchell. M. The same initials on Ethan's card. With trembling hands, Emily continued flipping through the album. There were more photos of the mansion, of social events, always with her grandmother present, discreet but elegant in her uniform. On one of the last pages, she found something even more surprising: an old newspaper clipping with the headline, "Mitchell Family Inaugurates New Corporate Headquarters." In the photo, a middle-aged man smiled next to a boy of approximately 10 years old. The boy had Ethan's same eyes. Emily could barely breathe. Her hands found another treasure at the bottom of the box, a small blue velvet case. Inside it was a delicate silver chain with an M-shaped pendant decorated with small gold details. It was a finely crafted jewel with a coat of arms that she recognized from Ethan's business card. "What are you doing up here, young lady?" Grandma Rose's voice startled Emily so much that she almost dropped the case. She hadn't heard her grandmother return. The elderly woman was standing at the entrance to the attic, leaning on her cane with an expression that mixed surprise and resignation. "Grandma, I found these photos," Emily stammered, showing the album. "Did you work for the Mitchell family?" Grandma Rose sighed deeply, her eyes fixed on the velvet case in her granddaughter's hands. "Some stories take time to be told, Emily. Not because we don't want to tell them, but because we need to find the strength to relive certain memories." The elderly woman walked slowly to an old rocking chair in the corner of the attic, sitting down carefully. "Yes, I worked for the Mitchells for over 20 years. I was the head housekeeper of the mansion. I took care of that house as if it were my own, saw that family grow." Her voice faltered for a moment, and Emily noticed that her grandmother's eyes were teary. "Little Ethan. He was just a boy when it all happened. So different from his father, always kind, always concerned about the employees." "What happened, Grandma?" Emily asked softly, sitting on the floor at her grandmother's feet. "It was 15 years ago. I discovered something I shouldn't have discovered. About family business, documents I shouldn't have seen. Ethan's father, Richard Mitchell, was a powerful man, Emily, and powerful people sometimes do things." She paused, choosing her words. "Things they shouldn't do." Emily was holding the case with the jewel, hypnotized by the story. "This necklace. It was a gift from Ethan's mother, Mrs. Helen. She gave it to me when I completed 15 years of service in the house." "You're part of the family," she said. Grandma Rose smiled sadly. "But when the problem started, when Richard discovered that I knew too much, well, let's say some doors close forever." The distant sound of a car horn on the street brought Emily back to the present. "So Ethan, he's really the Mitchell heir?" "Yes, my dear. And if he's appearing in our lives now, after so long..." Grandma Rose took her granddaughter's hands in hers. "Perhaps it's time for some truths to come to light." Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fit together, but there were still so many unanswered questions. Why was Ethan frequenting a simple neighborhood bakery? Why was he hiding his true identity? And most importantly, what had her grandmother discovered so many years ago that had changed the course of their lives? At that moment, her cell phone vibrated with a message. It was from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Some stories need to be rewritten. E." Ethan's message burned on the screen of Emily's cell phone as she paced nervously back and forth in her bedroom. After much thought, she replied with a simple "where and when." The response came almost instantaneously. "Vintage Grove Cafe, tomorrow at 3 p.m. Emily knew the place. It was a charming cafe in the historic downtown, occupying a restored 19th century mansion. What she didn't know, and what made Ethan's heart tighten as he sent the message, was that the establishment belonged to the Mitchell Group. The next morning, Emily woke up before her alarm. She spent extra time choosing an outfit that would be appropriate without seeming like she was trying too hard. She opted for a simple but elegant blue dress that she saved for special occasions. Grandma Rose watched her with a mixture of concern and pride. "Be careful with your heart, my dear," said the elderly woman, helping Emily fix her hair. "Sometimes the more genuine a feeling is, the more it can hurt us." The Vintage Grove Cafe was even more beautiful than Emily remembered. The colored stained glass windows filtered the afternoon light, creating multicolored patterns on the antique wooden floor. The aroma of freshly ground coffee mingled with the subtle perfume of fresh flowers in crystal vases. Ethan was already there, seated at a discreet table in the winter garden. This time he wore a well-tailored suit, no longer trying to disguise his true social position. When he saw Emily, he immediately stood up and she noticed a slight tremor in his hands. "Thank you for coming," he said, pulling out the chair for her. "I imagine you have many questions." Emily nodded, feeling the chain with the M pendant weighing on her neck. She had decided to wear it as a silent reminder of everything that needed to be clarified. Why the charade, Ethan? Why pretend to be someone you're not? He sighed, his eyes fixed on the coffee cup in front of him. "Because for the first time in my life, I wanted someone to see me for who I am, not for my last name or bank account." His eyes met hers. "When we met at the cinema, it was pure coincidence, but afterward I couldn't stay away." "And the bakery? Why keep going there?" "Initially, it was curiosity. Mr. Joe, his bakery is one of the last independent properties in the neighborhood. All the others have already been bought by the Mitchell Group for a revitalization project." Ethan paused. "But then I met you, and everything changed. Each visit became more about seeing your smile than about any business." Emily felt her heart race, but she maintained her composure. "My grandmother worked for your family." Ethan's face lit up with recognition. "Mrs. Rose, and of course, now I understand why your face seemed so familiar to me. She was like a second mother to me when I was a child." His expression darkened. "Until that day." "What day, Ethan? What really happened?" He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Emily, my father, he wasn't the man everyone thought he was. The company grew through questionable methods, inflated contracts, bribes." Ethan ran his hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. "Your grandmother discovered documents that proved all of this. My father fired her before she could make any accusations, ensuring she would never get another job anywhere." Emily felt her hands tremble. "So that's why we had to move to that neighborhood. Why she never managed to get a formal job again." "I was too young at the time to fully understand," continued Ethan. "But now, as president of the group, I have access to all the files. Emily, I've spent the last few years trying to fix my father's mistakes, returning money, renegotiating contracts." He hesitated, "and looking for people who were harmed in the process." A heavy silence fell over them. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in orange tones that penetrated through the stained glass. "Why are you telling me all this now?" Emily finally asked. "Because I can no longer pretend to be who I'm not with you." Ethan took an envelope from the inside pocket of his jacket. "And because I found something your grandmother needs to see. Documents that can finally bring justice after so many years." Emily looked at the envelope, feeling the weight of the history it carried. At that moment, a gentle breeze entered through the slightly open window, making the flowers in the vases dance gently. It was as if fate itself were breathing, waiting, to see what direction this story would take. The journey back home never seemed so long to Emily. The envelope Ethan had given her weighed in her purse as if it were made of lead. His words still echoed in her mind, mixing with the newly discovered memories of her grandmother. When she arrived home, she found Grandma Rose sitting in her favorite armchair, knitting what appeared to be a scarf. The late afternoon light entered, softly through the window, illuminating the elderly woman's wrinkled face with a golden glow. Emily took a deep breath before approaching. "Grandma, we need to talk," she said, sitting on the small stool at her grandmother's feet. "I met with Ethan today." Grandma Rose's hands stopped knitting for a moment, but her face remained serene. "And what did young Mitchell have to say?" Emily carefully took the envelope from her purse. "He gave me this. They're documents about the past, about what happened when you worked at the mansion." The elderly woman put aside her knitting and picked up her reading glasses that rested on the small side table. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the envelope. Inside there was a series of yellowed papers, contracts, receipts, and a handwritten letter that brought tears to Grandma Rose's eyes. "It's Helen's handwriting," she whispered, running her fingers over the elegant calligraphy. "Ethan's mother." Emily observed in silence as her grandmother read the letter. Emotions danced across the elderly woman's face, surprise, sadness, and something that seemed to be relief. "Helen always knew," said Grandma Rose finally, carefully folding the letter. "She knew I had discovered the irregularities, knew her husband was involved in shady business. This letter, she wrote it days before she left." "Left?" "Yes, my dear. Helen Mitchell disappeared from the mansion a few days after I was fired. Everyone said she had traveled abroad to treat an illness, but Grandma Rose sadly shook her head. I always suspected there was more to that story. Emily took her grandmother's hand in hers. What did the documents you found back then say? They were records of irregular payments, contracts with Shell, companies' bribes. Grandma Rose sighed deeply. But the worst weren't the documents themselves, it was the list of people who were harmed. Families who lost everything, small business owners who went bankrupt. Richard Mitchell built his empire on the suffering of others. And now Ethan is trying to fix it all, murmured Emily, remembering his words at the cafe. He was always different from his father, said Grandma Rose with a gentle smile. Even as a child he had a sensitive heart, always concerned about others. Helen raised him that way, to be more human than businessman. Emily stood up and walked to the window, observing the sky that was beginning to darken. He said he's looking for all the people who were harmed by his father, trying to make reparations. And he found us, added Grandma Rose, her eyes fixed on the documents in her lap. But Emily, my dear, you need to understand something. Sometimes, fate weaves its webs in mysterious ways. The fact that you and Ethan met, it wasn't just coincidence, was it? Emily turned to face her grandmother. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. But the important thing is what you both will do with this story now. Grandma Rose picked up another paper from the envelope, an official document with the Mitchell Group letterhead. This one is a proposal for financial compensation. Ethan is offering not only to restore everything we lost, but also— I don't want to know about that right now, Grandma, interrupted Emily, sitting down again next to the elderly woman. There's something more important I need to understand. You mentioned that Helen disappeared. When what really happened to her? Grandma Rose remained silent for a long moment, as if weighing each word before speaking. The night before her supposed trip, Helen came to my room in the mansion. She was agitated, nervous. She said she had discovered something even worse about her husband's business, something that went beyond simple corruption. She mentioned a diary. Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. A diary. Yes, she said she had recorded everything in it. But the next morning when I woke up, she had already left. The diary was never found. Grandma Rose adjusted herself in the armchair, her expression becoming more serious. And now, after all these years, I have the feeling that this diary might be the key to understanding this whole story. The next morning, Emily arrived earlier at the bakery, her mind still processing all the revelations from the previous night. The smell of fresh bread and freshly brewed coffee normally calmed her, but that day, not even the familiar aromas could quiet her thoughts. "You have a strange look today, girl," commented Mr. Joe, while preparing the first batch of the day. Did something happen? Emily hesitated for a moment before answering. "Mr. Joe, have you ever worked somewhere else before the bakery?" The baker stopped what he was doing and looked at her curiously. "Yes, I have. Why do you ask?" "By any chance," Emily lowered her voice, even though there was no one else in the bakery at that hour, "have you ever heard of the Mitchell family, Mr.?" Joe's face paled slightly. "The Mitchells? Of course I have. I worked as a gardener at their mansion for almost 10 years before opening the bakery." Emily felt her heart accelerate. "Were you there when my grandmother worked as a housekeeper?" "Mrs. Rose?" Mr. Joe's eyes widened in recognition. "So you're her little granddaughter. My, how did I not realize before?" He wiped his hands on his apron and sat on a stool nearby. "Your grandmother was one of the best people I've ever known. What they did to her was a tremendous injustice." "Were you there when Mrs. Helen disappeared?" Mr. Joe quickly looked from side to side as if checking if they were really alone. "Look, Emily, there are things from that time that are better left untouched, but—" He hesitated. "There's one thing I never told anyone. The night before Mrs. Helen left, I was taking care of the winter garden, that annex to the library. I saw her entering there very late at night, looking distressed. She stayed for a good while and left carrying something in her hands." "The diary," whispered Emily. "Could be. The next day, when we learned she had left in a rush, I found it strange. Mrs. Helen loved that winter garden, always said it was her favorite place in the mansion. She never traveled without leaving specific instructions about how to care for her plants. Emily absorbed every word with attention. And does the winter garden still exist? As far as I know, yes, but the mansion has been practically abandoned for years. After Richard Mitchell fell ill, no one else lived there, not even young Ethan. At that moment, the doorbell rang, announcing the arrival of the first customers of the day. Emily went back to work, but her mind was far away, in Mr. Joe's revelations. The winter garden. Could it be possible that Helen's diary was still hidden there, after so many years? During her lunch break, Emily couldn't resist and searched about the Mitchell mansion on her cell phone. The photos showed an imposing property, but clearly neglected. The winter garden was visible in some images, an elegant structure of glass and iron, now partially covered by vines. Her cell phone vibrated with a message from Ethan. "Can we talk? I need to show you something important." Emily quickly replied, "I also have something to tell you. It's about your mother." His response was almost instantaneous. "I'll meet you at the end of your shift." The rest of the day passed in a blur of customers, breads, and agitated thoughts. When Ethan arrived, shortly before closing, Emily noticed that he seemed different. There was an urgency in his movements, a tension in his shoulders that she had never seen before. "I found this in my father's office," he said, as soon as they sat at a table in the back of the bakery. It was an old photo showing Helen Mitchell in the winter garden. She smiled at the camera, holding a dark-covered book against her chest. "The diary," said Emily, her voice barely more than a whisper. Ethan looked at her in surprise. "How do you know about this?" "My grandmother told me, and Mr. Joe also worked at the mansion. He saw your mother in the library the night before she left." Ethan's eyes shone with a mixture of emotion and determination. "Emily, I always knew there was more to the story of my mother's disappearance than what I was told. And now, with everything I've discovered about my father's business, I'm sure she found something big, something that made her need to get away." "The winter garden is still there," said Emily, her voice gaining strength. "If your mother hid the diary somewhere, we need to go there," completed Ethan. "But Emily, I need to warn you, entering the mansion could be dangerous, not only because of the old structure, but because—" He hesitated. "There are people who wouldn't like certain secrets from the past to come to light." Emily looked out the bakery window, where the sky was beginning to take on the orange tones of sunset. In her mind, the pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fit together, forming a larger and more complex picture than she could have imagined. But one thing was clear: there was no turning back. It was time to discover the truth, no matter how painful it might be. The sun had already set when Emily and Ethan arrived at the gates of the Mitchell mansion. The imposing structure rose against the night sky like a shadow of the past, its dark windows silently observing the unexpected visitors. "Are you sure you want to do this?" asked Ethan, as he typed the security code into the electronic gate. "We can still turn back." Emily adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder, where she carried a flashlight and her cell phone. "We need to discover the truth, Ethan. For your mother, for my grandmother, for everyone who was involved in this story." The gate opened with a metallic creak, revealing a stone path overgrown with weeds. The garden, once meticulously cared for by Mr. Joe, was now a miniature jungle. Wild vines had taken over the decorative statues, transforming them into silent green sentinels. "The winter garden is at the back of the mansion," explained Ethan, guiding the way with his own flashlight. "It was my mother's favorite place. She spent hours there tending to the plants and reading." As they walked, Emily noticed that Ethan seemed tense, his eyes constantly scanning the surroundings. "There's something you're not telling me?" He hesitated before answering. "I've received some warnings. People connected to my father's old business aren't happy with my investigations, and if there really is a diary with evidence." A sudden noise made them stop. It was just a stray cat jumping between the bushes, but the scare made Emily instinctively grab Ethan's arm, just as she had done that first night at the cinema. Finally, they reached the winter garden. The glass and iron structure rose majestically, despite the abandonment. The moonlight passed through the dusty panels, creating ghostly patterns on the floor covered with dry leaves. "How are we going?" "To find anything here?" asked Emily, observing the spacious area. Old shelves extended along the walls, still occupied by empty pots and rusty gardening tools. "My mother always said that the best place to hide a secret is where no one would think to look," replied Ethan, moving through the space with familiarity. "She loved to hide small surprises for me when I was a child." Emily began to examine the shelves, while Ethan checked the floor for loose boards. The silence was broken only by the sound of their breathing and the occasional hoot of a distant owl. It was then that Emily noticed something curious. One of the old pots had a different pattern from the others. It was apparently simple but had small carvings that formed an almost imperceptible design. "Ethan, come see this," she called, carefully picking up the pot. When she turned it over, she realized that the base was false, creating a secret compartment. With trembling hands, Ethan helped to remove the base. Inside, they found a package wrapped in waxed fabric, perfectly preserved despite the years. When they unwrapped it, it revealed a dark covered book, exactly like the one in the photo. "The diary," whispered Ethan, his voice choked with emotion. But before they could open it, a beam of light cut through the darkness of the winter garden, coming from the mansion. Male voices could be heard approaching. "Quick," murmured Ethan, putting the diary in Emily's bag. "There's an exit through the back of the garden. We need to get out of here now." Emily felt her heart race as she followed Ethan between the shadows of the plants. The voices were getting closer and closer, and now they could clearly hear footsteps on the stairs leading to the winter garden. "We can't let them find anything," the voices said. "Old Mitchell was clear before he fell ill. Nobody can know the truth about that night." Ethan and Emily crouched behind a large pot when the winter garden door opened. Through the leaves, Emily could see two men in suits entering the space, their flashlights methodically scanning every corner. "Are you sure the information is correct?" asked one of them. "That the woman hid something here?" "The boss never makes mistakes," replied the other. "And now that young Mitchell is poking into the past, we need to act quickly." Ethan held Emily's hand tightly, silently guiding her toward the back exit. Each step had to be calculated to avoid making noise with the dry leaves on the floor. Emily could feel the diary in her bag, as if it weighed a ton. When they finally reached the back door, the soft creak of the hinge seemed deafening in the silence of the night. The men immediately turned their flashlights in the direction of the sound. "Someone's here," one of them shouted. "Run," whispered Ethan, pulling Emily by the hand. Together, they darted through the darkness of the abandoned garden, their hearts beating in the same frantic rhythm as their steps. Ethan's apartment was a safe haven on the 20th floor of a modern building downtown. After escaping from the mansion, he insisted it was the only place where they could examine the diary without risks. Emily had called Grandma Rose, explaining that she needed to spend the night at a friend's house because of an urgent project. The spacious living room with its floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning view of the illuminated city. But neither Emily nor Ethan paid attention to the nocturnal landscape. Sitting on the dark leather sofa, their attention was completely focused on the diary that rested between them. "You should be the first to read it," said Ethan softly. "Your grandmother and you suffered so much because of this story." "You have that right." With trembling hands, Emily opened the diary. Helen Mitchell's elegant handwriting filled the yellowed pages, telling a story that had been hidden for 15 years. September 2010, Emily began reading aloud. "Today I discovered something that changed everything I thought I knew about my life. Richard is not the man I thought he was. The documents I found in his office reveal a scheme much larger than simple corruption." As they advanced in their reading, the true dimension of the story was revealed. Helen had discovered that Richard Mitchell was not only manipulating contracts and paying bribes, but was also involved in a complex scheme of real estate market manipulation. Entire families were forced to sell their properties for ridiculous values through threats and blackmail. "My God," whispered Ethan, running his hands over his face. "So that's why he always managed to buy land for such low prices." Emily continued reading. "Rose discovered part of the truth, but not all. I need to protect her. She has a little granddaughter. I can't let them suffer the consequences. Richard has a lot of power, knows dangerous people. I've made my decision. I'm going to gather all the evidence and turn it over to the authorities, but I need to do this from a safe place. The following pages detailed Helen's plan to escape, taking with her documents that would incriminate Richard and his associates. She had meticulously planned everything, including a way to protect her son. "My Ethan," said one of the last passages, "if one day you find this diary, I want you to know that everything I did was thinking of you. I couldn't allow you to grow up believing that power and money justify any action. There are more important things in life: honesty, compassion, love." Ethan couldn't hold back the tears. Emily held his hand, offering silent support as he processed the truth about his mother. "She didn't abandon me," he said finally. "She was trying to do the right thing. And she managed to escape," added Emily, pointing to the last entry in the diary. "Look at this. She mentions a safe place abroad and codes for bank accounts where she stored the evidence." At that moment, Ethan's cell phone rang. It was an unknown number. He answered with hesitation, putting it on speakerphone. "Ethan?" The female voice on the other end of the line made his heart stop. "Son, it's me." The silence that followed was deafening. Emily could hear Ethan's heart beating erratically. "Mom?" His voice was barely more than a whisper. "Yes, dear. I know you found my diary. I've been waiting for this for a long time. Now I can finally come home." Ethan squeezed Emily's hand tightly, as if he needed to make sure he wasn't dreaming. From the other end of the line, Helen Mitchell continued. "I have all the evidence saved, Ethan. And now that you're in charge of the company, we can finally do things the right way. Fix the mistakes of the past." Emily observed the scene with tears in her eyes, thinking of her own grandmother, of how this revelation would change everything. The truth, kept for so long in the winter garden, was finally coming to light, like a flower that waits for the right moment to bloom. Tuesday morning, with its clear skies and gentle breeze, found Ethan, Emily, Grandma Rose, and Mr. Joe gathered at the Mitchell mansion. The winter garden, now bathed in sunlight, seemed less mysterious than it had the night before. Ethan had made arrangements for a deep cleaning crew to begin work on the abandoned property, and today they were meeting to go through some of the personal items that had been left behind. Mainly, they were looking for any additional documents that Helen might have hidden before her departure. "She was always so clever," said Grandma Rose, carefully examining a bookshelf in the library. "Helen knew exactly where to hide things, so Richard would never find them." Mr. Joe nodded in agreement. "She loved puzzles and riddles, all those crossword puzzles she used to do every morning at breakfast." He smiled at the memory. "Once, she hid my birthday present so well that it took me 3 days to find it, following her clues." Emily was scanning the walls of the winter garden again, looking for any irregularities or hidden compartments. Ethan was going through old photo albums that they had found in a trunk in the attic. "Look at this," he called, showing a particular photo. It showed a young Helen in a garden somewhere tropical, with a date stamp from just 2 months after her disappearance. She was already planning her new life. "And look how she's holding her necklace in the photo," observed Emily, pointing to the detail. "It's the same M pendant." Grandma Rose approached to see the photo, her eyes filling with tears. Always leaving clues. That was so like her. The morning passed with small discoveries, letters hidden between the pages of books, photographs, with coded messages written on the back, and most valuable of all, a small notebook containing contacts of all those involved in Richard's scheme. As they worked, Emily couldn't help but observe Ethan. There was a lightness to him now, as if part of the weight he had been carrying had been lifted. The knowledge that his mother hadn't abandoned him, but had instead made an immense sacrifice to protect him and others, had transformed him somehow. During a short break, they all sat in the winter garden, drinking tea that Mr. Joe had prepared. The sun cast warm patterns through the glass panels, and for a moment, it was almost possible to imagine what this place had been like in its glory days. "What will happen to the mansion now?" asked Emily, voicing the question that had been on her mind. Ethan looked around thoughtfully. "I'm not sure yet. It holds too many painful memories to ever be a home again, I think, but it could be transformed into something positive." His eyes lit up suddenly. "Maybe a community center, or a space for arts and education. That would be wonderful, said Grandma Rose, her eyes sparkling. This place has seen too much darkness. It deserves to be filled with light and hope now. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of a car pulling up the driveway. Through the glass panels of the winter garden, they could see a sleek black sedan approaching the house. That must be the investigator I hired, said Ethan, standing up. I asked her to begin compiling a case against the remaining conspirators in my father's scheme. The car door opened and a woman stepped out. She was tall and elegant, with silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a chignon. Even from a distance, there was something familiar about her posture, the way she carried herself. Is that... Grandma Rose stood up shakily, her hand going to her heart. Ethan was already running toward the door. It's her, he confirmed, his voice thick with emotion. My mother is home. Emily watched as Ethan embraced the woman, both of them standing still in that moment, as if the world had stopped spinning. Beside her, Grandma Rose was crying quietly, years of worry and secrets, finally finding release. She looks the same, whispered the elderly woman, just a bit older, a bit wiser perhaps. As Helen Mitchell walked toward the winter garden, her arm linked with her son's, Emily could see what Grandma Rose meant. There was a dignified grace to the woman, a quiet strength that had allowed her to carry out her plan and survive all these years away from her son and her home. Rose, Helen's voice was warm and rich, filled with emotion. My dear, dear friend. The two women embraced, a friendship that had transcended class, distance, and time. Mr. Joe stood nearby, wiping away tears with the back of his hand, a smile spreading across his weathered face. When Helen turned to Emily, her eyes were knowing and kind. And you must be little Emily. You've grown into such a beautiful young woman. She took Emily's hands in hers. Thank you for being there for my son, for helping him find the truth. The day progressed with revelations and planning. Helen had brought with her a wealth of evidence, financial records, secret recordings, witness statements, all meticulously gathered and preserved during her years in exile. I never stopped working on this, not for a single day, she explained, as they sat around the large dining table, now covered with documents. I knew that one day when Ethan was old enough and strong enough to take on his father's empire, we would need all of this to set things right. The plan they formed was comprehensive: full restitution to all who had been harmed, prosecution of those who were still actively participating in illegal activities, and a complete restructuring of the Mitchell Group's business practices. And the bakery? Asked Emily, thinking of Mr. Joe's beloved establishment. What about all the small businesses in the neighborhood that were targeted? That's where we'll start, said Ethan firmly. Full ownership returned to the rightful proprietors, with compensation for lost earnings, and a community development fund to help revitalize the area without displacing anyone. Helen nodded approvingly. You see, Rose, she said, turning to her old friend, I told you he would grow up to be a good man despite everything. As the afternoon turned into evening, Emily found herself standing on the balcony outside the library, looking out over the neglected gardens. She was trying to process everything that had happened, all the revelations and changes that had come so quickly. She felt a presence beside her and turned to find Ethan, his face peaceful in the fading light. Overwhelming, isn't it? He said. Softly. Emily nodded. A week ago I was just a bakery clerk with secret dreams of being an artist. And now you're part of rewriting a story that affected so many lives, he completed, including mine. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. I keep thinking, said Emily finally, about how many stories like this are out there, how many people with power abuse it, and how many others suffer silently because of it. That's why what we're doing matters, replied Ethan. One story at a time, one wrong made right. He turned to her, his expression earnest. Emily, I want you to know that no matter what happens with all of this, my feelings for you are real. They have nothing to do with our family's past. Emily felt her heart skip a beat. I believe you, she said simply. Some things are just meant to be, I guess. Inside the mansion, they could hear Grandma Rose laughing at something Helen had said, the sound floating out to them like music. In that moment, On that balcony, with the past finally released and the future spread out before them, Emily felt a sense of possibility she had never known before. The world was suddenly larger, filled with more colors and opportunities than she had ever dared to dream. And somewhere in that expanded universe there was a place for her stories, both the ones she drew in her sketchbook and the ones she was living now. The dawn found Emily and Ethan still in his apartment, exhausted but unable to sleep. Helen had promised to arrive in Boston on the next available flight from Switzerland, where she had lived all these years under a false name. The city was beginning to awaken outside, unaware of the revolution happening on the 20th floor of that building. "I need to tell my grandmother everything," said Emily, watching the first rays of sun tinting the horizon. "She deserves to know the whole truth." Ethan nodded, serving another cup of coffee for both of them. "We can pick her up and bring her here. It'll be safer. Those men at the mansion, we don't know how far they might go to prevent the truth from coming out." An hour later, they were at the door of the modest house where Emily lived with her grandmother. Grandma Rose was on the porch, as if she knew they would come. Her eyes widened when she recognized Ethan. "My goodness," she whispered, bringing her hands to her face. "You're the spitting image of your mother." The meeting between Grandma Rose and Ethan was emotional. The elderly woman embraced him for a long time, as if reuniting with a long-lost grandson. Emily observed the scene with a heavy heart, thinking of how many years of pain and separation that embrace was healing. "Mrs. Helen is alive," Ethan revealed softly, "and she's coming home." Grandma Rose needed to sit down, her legs trembling at the news. Emily quickly fetched a glass of water for her grandmother, while Ethan explained about the diary, the evidence kept safe, her mother's meticulous plan to protect everyone. "I knew it," said Grandma Rose, wiping away tears. "I knew Helen would never abandon everything without a good reason. She was too strong, too principled for that." While they prepared a small suitcase for Grandma Rose, the elderly woman insisted on bringing an old wooden box with her. "These are memories from that time," she explained. "Letters from your mother, Ethan, photos, small keepsakes I've kept all these years." On the way to Ethan's apartment, Emily noticed a dark car that seemed to be following them. "Ethan," she whispered, lightly squeezing his arm as he drove. "I think we're not alone." He checked the rearview mirror, his face tensing as he confirmed Emily's suspicion. "Hold on," he murmured, making an unexpected right turn. The pursuing car accelerated, trying to catch up with them. Ethan remained calm, skillfully maneuvering through the city streets, until he managed to lose them by entering a busy shopping center. "We need to be more careful," he said, while they waited in the parking lot. "They must be monitoring all our movements." "Who are they exactly?" asked Emily. "Former associates of my father," replied Ethan, his eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. "People who have a lot to lose if the truth comes out. In the last few months, while I was investigating the past, I received several warnings to stop." Grandma Rose, who had been silent in the back seat, opened her box of memories and removed a yellowed envelope. "This might help," she said, handing the envelope to Ethan. "Your mother gave me this a few days before she left, asking me to keep it safe. I never opened it, respecting her request." With trembling hands, Ethan opened the envelope. Inside was a list of names and numbers, along with a small USB drive. "These are all the people involved in the scheme," he said, after examining the documents. "Politicians, businessmen, public officials. My mother mapped the entire corruption network, and she kept a copy with someone she trusted completely," completed Emily, looking with admiration at her grandmother. Grandma Rose smiled sadly. "Helen knew I would never betray her trust, even after everything that happened. Our friendship went far beyond employer and employee." When they finally arrived at the apartment, they found a surprise. Mr. Joe was waiting at the reception, visibly agitated. "Emily, thank God I found you," he exclaimed. "You need to see this immediately." In his hands, a newspaper of the day displayed a headline that made everyone's blood run cold. "Mitchell Empire on the verge of collapse, documents reveal." Decades-long scheme. The photo showed Richard Mitchell, now an elderly and sick man, being taken to a police car. The Ethan's apartment transformed into an improvised operations center. Mr. Joe brought not only the newspaper, but also an old folder he had kept all those years. Mrs. Helen gave me this on the last night, he explained, carefully opening the folder. Said that someday someone would need this information. They're old blueprints of the mansion, with notes about specific locations. Ethan examined the documents carefully. These are markings of all the places where important documents were hidden, he said, his eyes shining with understanding. The Winter Garden was just one of them. Emily observed the movement of the city through the window, thoughtful. The news in the newspaper meant they weren't the only ones looking for answers. Someone had anticipated them, exposing part of the truth to the media. We need to act quickly, said Grandma Rose, her voice carrying the wisdom of her years. If the news has already leaked, those men must be desperate. As if confirming her words, Ethan's cell phone rang again. It was a blocked number. Mr. Mitchell? A grave and unfamiliar voice sounded over the speakerphone. I suggest you stop. Your investigations immediately. Certain stories should remain buried. It's too late, replied Ethan, his voice firm. The truth is already coming to light. Then prepare for the consequences, the voice threatened before hanging up. The silence that followed was broken by the sound of the intercom. The doorman announced the arrival of a woman who said she was Helen Mitchell. Time seemed to freeze. Ethan stood up, his legs trembling slightly. Emily held his hand, offering silent support. When the elevator door opened, it was as if the past and present collided. Helen Mitchell had aged with elegance. Her now grey hair framed a face that still maintained the same determination from 15 years ago. My son, she whispered, opening her arms. The meeting between mother and son was breathtaking. Ethan embraced Helen as if fearing she might disappear again, while silent tears ran down the faces of both. Grandma Rose was the next to approach. The two friends met in the middle of the living room, an embrace that carried 15 years of longing and shared secrets. Rose, my friend, said Helen, her voice choked with emotion, you kept our secrets so well. And you protected all of us, even from a distance, replied Grandma Rose. Helen then turned to Emily, her eyes shining with recognition. You must be little Emily. The last time I saw you, you were just a child, playing in the mansion gardens. The moment was interrupted by Mr. Joe, who approached the window with a worried expression. Excuse me for interrupting, but we have company. 2 black cars just parked in front of the building. Ethan quickly checked the security cameras through his tablet. It's them, the same men from the mansion. Don't worry, said Helen, a confident smile appearing on her face. I didn't come unprepared. The federal police are on their way. All the documents and evidence I gathered in these 15 years are already with the competent authorities. Emily observed this extraordinary woman with admiration. Helen Mitchell wasn't just a woman who had fled to protect herself. She was someone who had spent 15 years meticulously building a solid case against all the people involved in the scheme. What happens now? Asked Emily, her voice low. Helen approached the window, observing the city she had left behind so long ago. Now, my dear, the real reconstruction begins, not just of the company, but of all the lives that were affected by this story. Grandma Rose took Emily's hand, squeezing it gently. At the other end of the room, Ethan observed his mother with a new look, no longer of abandonment, but of understanding and admiration. The sound of sirens began to echo on the street below. The truth, kept for so long in winter gardens and wounded hearts, was finally finding its way to the light. The days that followed were a whirlwind of events. The press gave no respite, the phones wouldn't stop ringing, and the Mitchell name was in all the headlines. In the midst of this chaos, Emily found refuge in the most unlikely place, Mr. Joe's old bakery. People need bread, no matter what's happening in the world, he said, smiling as he prepared another batch. The bakery had become a safe haven, where life continued its normal course, despite the upheavals happening outside. That specific morning, while organizing the shelves, Emily reflected on how her life had changed. The small house she shared with her grandmother was now empty. Grandma Rose had accepted Helen's invitation to temporarily stay in the penthouse she had rented upon returning to the city. Your grandmother deserves all the comfort in the world, Helen had insisted. It's the least I can do after all these years. The bell on the door rang, announcing Ethan's arrival. He looked tired, but his eyes shone with renewed determination. "How was the meeting with the shareholders?" asked Emily as she prepared the espresso he so appreciated. "Surprisingly well," he replied, sitting at the counter. "Most understood that changes are necessary. We're restructuring the entire company, creating a new ethics board, reviewing all the old contracts." Emily observed how different he seemed now. There was no longer any need for disguises or lies. Ethan could finally be who he really was, a man determined to fix the mistakes of the past. "And most importantly," he continued, his eyes meeting hers, "we're creating a compensation fund for all the families who were harmed by my father's business." Mr. Joe, who was nearby organizing bread, stopped to listen. "And the bakery?" he asked, his voice betraying a hint of concern. Ethan smiled. "You won't believe it, but we found the original purchase documents for this property. The bakery was always yours, Mr. Joe. My father never had legal rights to it. The old baker needed to lean on the counter, overcome with emotion, after all these years." "And there's more," continued Ethan. "My mother suggested creating a development program for small businesses in the neighborhood. The bakery could be the pilot project, if you'll accept. We could modernize the space, expand production, but maintaining all the essence and tradition." Emily felt her eyes fill with tears. It was as if all the pieces were finally falling into place, not just in her life, but in everyone's around her. "And what about your comics?" asked Ethan, changing the subject. "Have you decided what to do with them?" Emily blushed slightly. In the confusion of the last few days, she had almost forgotten that Ethan had discovered her secret talent. "I don't know. I never thought anyone would really be interested." "Well, you should take a look at this," he said, taking an envelope from his folder. It was a letter from a renowned publisher, expressing interest in her stories. "How?" Emily took the letter with trembling hands. "Let's just say a little bird showed some of your drawings to the right people," he replied with a mischievous smile. "Your talent is real, Emily. You don't need to hide anymore." Mrs. Nancy, who had arrived silently and was listening to the conversation, couldn't contain a squeal of joy. "I always said it. Our Emily has a special gift." The rest of the morning passed like a dream. Customers came and went, buying bread and sweets, oblivious to the major changes that were happening in that small establishment. Emily continued her work, but her mind was populated with possibilities she had never dared to imagine before. During her lunch break, she sat with her sketchbook in the small patio behind the bakery. The pages were full of comics about ordinary heroes facing extraordinary challenges. Now she realized that her own life had turned into one of those stories. "You know," said Ethan, who had quietly joined her, "sometimes reality surpasses any story we can create." Emily smiled, closing her notebook. "And sometimes we need to go through a whole adventure to discover who we really are." The sound of the city around them continued its constant rhythm, but there in that small bakery patio, the world seemed different, fuller of possibilities, richer in hope. The transformation of the bakery began on a sunny Monday. Architects, fan designers filled the space, taking measurements and making notes, while Mr. Joe observed everything with a mixture of anxiety and expectation. The modernization project would maintain the essence of the place, preserving its historical elements while updating equipment and structure. "It will still be the same bakery as always," Emily assured an elderly customer who was watching the changes with suspicion, just without the strange noise from the oven anymore. In the new organizational structure, Mr. Joe would be not only the official owner, but also the production director of a network of community bakeries that would be established in the neighborhood. The project, conceived by Helen and supported by Ethan, aimed to create employment opportunities and local development. "I never thought I'd live to see this," commented Mrs. Nancy, emotional, while admiring the plans for the new confectionery space that would be built especially for her. "From employee to pastry chef with my own team." Emily divided her time between working at the bakery and meetings with the publisher. Her comics had touched something special in the editors, stories about ordinary people discovering their own strength, about second chances and new beginnings, themes she now knew intimately. "You have a gift for capturing people's essence," said Helen, leafing through one of Emily's sketchbooks. The woman had become a constant presence at the bakery, always bringing new ideas and especially stories from the past that helped heal old wounds. Grandma Rose, who now helped with the bakery administration, seemed rejuvenated. Her knowledge from her years as housekeeper at the Mitchell mansion proved valuable in organizing the new venture. And more importantly, she could finally tell her stories without fear. "You know what makes me happiest?" she said one afternoon, while everyone shared coffee after closing. "Seeing that all the suffering of the past has transformed into something good, like bread dough that needs to be beaten and shaped before turning into something delicious." Ethan, who spent more and more time at the bakery, supposedly supervising the renovations, but everyone knew it was for another reason, smiled at the comment. "Sometimes we need to lose everything to discover what really matters," he said, his gaze meeting Emily's. The two had grown even closer during the whole process. Between planning meetings and tasting sessions for new products, they discovered they shared more than just an intertwined past. They had the same dreams of making a difference in the world. One night, while closing the bakery, Ethan surprised Emily with an unexpected proposal. "What do you think about turning the bakery story into your first graphic novel?" Emily stopped what she was doing, intrigued. "What do you mean?" "Think about it," he continued, enthusiastic. "It's a story about perseverance, about people who never gave up on their dreams even in the most difficult moments, about a community that stayed united, and about how love can transform lives." The idea began to take shape in Emily's mind. She could see the pages forming, the drawings of the old bakery, the familiar faces of the customers, Mr. Joe's strength, Mrs. Nancy's dedication, her grandmother's wisdom. "And we could use part of the profits to create a support fund for young artists in the neighborhood," added Ethan, his eyes shining with the possibility. Emily felt her heart race, not just for the idea, but for the way Ethan always thought of others, of how to use his resources to do good. It was so different from the empire his father had built. "It would be a way to tell our story," she said finally, "to show that there's always hope, even in the darkest moments." Outside, the city lights were beginning to turn on, dotting the night with thousands of small bright points. Inside the bakery, the smell of fresh bread still lingered in the air, mixing with the aroma of coffee and infinite possibilities. "You know," said Emily, picking up her sketchbook, "I think I finally understood something I've been drawing in my comics for years." "What?" asked Ethan, curious. "That the true heroes aren't those with superpowers, but ordinary people who choose to do the right thing, even when it's difficult, people who don't give up on their dreams, and who help others achieve theirs." Ethan smiled, taking her hand. "Like a baker who is secretly a talented artist. Or like a businessman who chose to rebuild an empire based on honesty and the common good," she replied, returning the smile. The bakery's grand reopening was scheduled for a week later, and nervousness was palpable in the air. The renovations were almost completed, transforming the old establishment into a welcoming space that blended modernity with the tradition everyone loved so much. Emily was at her new workspace, a specially designed area on the bakery's mezzanine, where she could draw while observing the movement in the main hall. The pages of her graphic novel were coming to life under her skilled fingers, telling not just the story of the bakery, but of all the lives that intertwined in that special place. "How's the story coming along?" asked Helen, climbing the stairs with a steaming cup of coffee. Since her return, she had become a sort of mentor to Emily, always offering valuable perspectives for both her drawings and for life. "I'm trying to capture the essence of each person," replied Emily, showing the sketches. "Look, here's the scene, where Grandma Rose finds the diary, and here Mr. Joe taking care of the mansion's garden." Helen examined the drawings carefully, her eyes filling with tears as she recognized moments from the past transformed into art. "You have a special gift, Emily, not just for drawing, but for seeing the beauty in people, even in the most difficult moments." Downstairs, Mr. Joe was testing the new equipment with the enthusiasm of a child with new toys. The state-of-the-art Italian oven was already producing perfect batches of bread, and the new imported coffee machine made Ethan smile like a boy every time he prepared an espresso. "Come see this," called Mrs. Nancy from her new confectionery space. Everyone went downstairs to find a work of art in the form of a cake, a miniature replica of the bakery with all the details of the renovated facade reproduced in fondant. "It's for the reopening," she explained, proud. Each tier represents a different phase of our history. Grandma Rose, who observed everything from her new special chair near the counter, couldn't contain her smile. Who would have thought that that small neighborhood bakery would transform into something so special? "And this is just the beginning," said Ethan, showing plans of other establishments in the neighborhood. "We already have 5 other small merchants interested in participating in the revitalization project. Each will maintain their independence, but they'll have all the necessary support to grow." Emily observed the interaction between everyone with a full heart. It was amazing how, in just a few months, old wounds had begun to heal, giving way to new dreams and possibilities. "Oh, I almost forgot," exclaimed Helen, taking an envelope from her purse. "This arrived today from the publisher. They're the final contracts for the publication of the graphic novel." Emily's heart raced as she took the envelope. Inside, besides the contracts, there was a letter from the editor-in-chief praising the first chapters and suggesting a complete series about transformation stories in communities. "They want more?" she asked, incredulous. "Of course they do," replied Ethan, who had approached silently. "Your stories show that there's always hope, that it's possible to rebuild and start over, no matter how difficult the path may seem." At that moment, a group of neighborhood children passed by the window, stopping to admire the renovations. One of them carried a sketchbook, and Emily recognized in her the same sparkle in the eyes she used to have when she dreamed of being an artist. "Hey, I have an idea," she said, turning to Ethan and Helen. "What if we created a space here in the bakery for art workshops? We could teach drawing, tell stories, inspire other people to express their creativity. Like a cultural and gastronomic center," completed Helen, enthusiastic. "We can use the second-floor space that's still vacant." Ethan was already making notes on his tablet. "We can invite local artists to exhibit their work, create a mentorship program for young talents, and I can teach children how to decorate cupcakes," added Mrs. Nancy, her eyes shining with the possibility. Grandma Rose watched everything with a serene smile. "Look at that. From a place where we just made bread, we're creating a space where people can feed not only the body, but also the soul." Emily felt a strong emotion tighten her chest. There she was, surrounded by people who had transformed pain into hope, fear into courage, past into future. Her pencil itched to capture that moment, to transform it into another page of her story. "Sometimes," she said, picking up her sketchbook, "real life is more extraordinary than any story we can invent." On the eve of the reopening, as the sun set painting the sky in orange hues, Emily and Ethan walked through the neighborhood, observing how the area was beginning to gain new life. The storefronts were being renovated, maintaining their original charm while gaining touches of modernity. "It's incredible how everything has changed in such a short time," commented Emily, stopping in front of the old theater where it all began. The building, which once seemed destined for demolition, now displayed a sign announcing its future restoration. "Speaking of which," said Ethan, a mysterious smile playing on his lips, "I have a surprise for you." He took a small golden envelope from his pocket. Emily opened it curiously, finding 2 tickets for a special screening at the theater. "But it's still closed for renovation." "Not tonight," replied Ethan. "I got a special permission for a private screening, the same film we were watching when we met." The interior of the theater was illuminated only by a few strategic lights, creating a magical atmosphere. Despite the renovation not having started, someone had cleaned 2 seats in the center of the room and installed a portable projector. "This reminds me so much of that night," said Emily, sitting down. "I was so embarrassed for grabbing your thumb." "And I was so happy that you did," completed Ethan, taking her hand. "It was in that moment that I realized all the plan to discreetly investigate the bakery had gone down the drain. I wouldn't be able to maintain professional distance anymore. Emily smiled, remembering how everything seemed complicated back then. Who would have thought that that scare at the cinema would bring us here? The film began to roll, but neither was paying much attention. They were lost in their own memories, in everything they had lived through in the last few months. "Emily," said Ethan softly, turning to her, "I need to tell you something. Remember when you showed me your first drawings? Actually, I already knew them." "What do you mean?" "A few weeks before we met at the cinema, I was researching the bakery and the neighborhood. I found your art blog by chance. Your drawings. They told stories about ordinary people facing challenges, about hope and new beginnings. It was there that I realized the neighborhood didn't need a revitalization that would drive out its residents. It needed a transformation that would preserve its soul." Emily felt her heart race. "So, it wasn't a coincidence?" "Our meeting at the cinema was completely by chance," he assured her. "But afterwards, when I discovered you were the artist who had inspired me to change all the original plans of the companies, well, I realized that destiny sometimes works in mysterious ways." In the darkness of the theater, with only the projector light illuminating their faces, they looked at each other as if it were the first time. All the fear, all the mistrust from the beginning had transformed into something deep and true. "Did you know I've started a new series of comics?" commented Emily after a moment of comfortable silence. "Besides the graphic novel about the bakery?" "Yes, it's about people who keep secrets, not out of malice, but to protect those they love. About how sometimes we need to lose ourselves to find ourselves." She paused, smiling. "I wonder where I got inspiration for that from." Ethan laughed softly, pulling her closer. "And how does this story end?" "I'm still writing it," she replied, resting her head on his shoulder. "But I think it's going to have a happy ending." Outside, the city lights were beginning to turn, on one by one like stars appearing in the urban sky. Inside the old theater, two people whom destiny had united in an unlikely manner shared much more than just a moment. They shared dreams, hopes, and the certainty that sometimes the best stories are those that life writes when we're not planning. The day of the reopening dawned with a radiant sun, as if the sky itself wanted to participate in the celebration. From the early hours of the morning, the bakery buzzed with activity. Mr. Joe had arrived in the wee hours to prepare special batches of all types of bread, filling the air with irresistible aromas. Mrs. Nancy was putting the finishing touches on her masterpiece. In addition to the bakery-shaped cake, she had prepared a dessert table that looked more like an art exhibition. Each piece told a part of the place's history, from traditional honey breads to sophisticated macarons, with flavors inspired by everyone's memories. "Look what I found," said Grandma Rose, entering the bakery with an old box in her arms. Inside were yellowed photographs of the bakery's original opening, decades ago. "I thought we could make a mural with the place's history." Emily, who was coming down from the mezzanine with some of her drawings, felt her eyes fill with tears at seeing the photos. There was Mr. Joe, much younger, but with the same kind smile, beside his wife who had already passed away. There were also photos of the neighborhood, showing how everything had changed over time. "This is perfect," she exclaimed, already visualizing how she could incorporate the images into her exhibition. In the space dedicated to art, Emily had set up a small gallery with drawings that told the story of the bakery and the neighborhood, including sketches of her future graphic novel. Helen arrived shortly after, bringing with her a surprise, an old bread recipe that was traditional in the Mitchell mansion. "I thought we could add this to today's special menu," she suggested, handing the yellowed paper to Mr. Joe. It was Ethan's favorite recipe as a child. The baker examined the recipe with professional interest, his eyes shining as he recognized the unique combination of ingredients. "This will make an extraordinary bread," he commented, already separating the ingredients. Throughout the morning, more and more people arrived to help with the preparations. Neighbors brought flowers to decorate the tables, neighborhood children helped blow up balloons, and even some of the old grumpier customers appeared to lend a hand. "It's amazing how a place can unite so many people," commented Emily with Ethan, who had just arrived carrying more surprises for the opening. "And this is just the beginning," he replied, his eyes shining with enthusiasm. "I just left a meeting with the Neighborhood Merchants Association, Everyone is excited about the revitalization projects that preserve the essence of the place. In the new cultural space on the second floor, a group of local young artists was helping to set up a collective exhibition. Emily had insisted that the opening should not be just about the bakery, but about the entire community. "Look who's here," announced Mrs. Nancy from the door. It was Peter, Mr. Joe's son, who had moved to the countryside years ago. He came bringing his own contribution to the opening, special breads made with organic ingredients from his small farm. The reunion between father and son was emotional. Mr. Joe, always so reserved, couldn't hold back tears as he embraced his son. "Now the bakery is really complete," he said, his voice choked. As the time of the opening approached, a special energy filled the environment. It wasn't just the opening of a renovated commercial establishment. It was the celebration of a community that had united, of dreams that had survived adversity, of people who had found strength in each other. Emily went back up to the mezzanine to get the last drawings when she found a surprise on her desk, a small package wrapped in artisanal paper with her name written in Ethan's elegant handwriting. Inside was an artisanal sketchbook, beautifully bound in leather, with an inscription on the first page: "So you can continue telling stories that transform lives. With love, Ethan." Moved, Emily looked down, observing the movement in the main hall. She saw Grandma Rose and Helen chatting animatedly while arranging the last flowers, Mr. Joe and Peter preparing a special batch of bread from the old recipe, Mrs. Nancy giving final touches to her artistic sweets. It was more than just a simple bakery. It was a place where stories met, where past and present mixed to create something new and special. And she, Emily, had the privilege of recording all of this through her art. The moment of the opening arrived with a mixture of emotion and expectation in the air. A small crowd was already forming outside the bakery, eager to know the new space. Among those present were not only neighborhood residents, but also journalists, local artists, and even some of the former employees of the Mitchell mansion. "It's time," said Ethan softly, approaching Emily, who was watching the movement through the mezzanine window. "Ready?" She nodded, taking his hand. Together they went down to join the others. Mr. Joe was positioned near the door, wearing a new apron with the bakery's redesigned logo. Grandma Rose and Helen remained side by side, like two guardians of a story that was finally finding its happy ending. When the doors opened, it was as if a wave of joy invaded the environment. People entered admiring every detail: the restored counter that maintained its old elegance, the new equipment that discreetly shined, the walls that now displayed a mural with photos and drawings telling the story of the place. "Welcome to the New Oak Ridge Bakery," announced Mr. Joe, his voice loaded with emotion. "Or better yet, to your new home." The aroma of the special bread made with the old Mitchell family recipe spread through the environment, mixing with the smell of Mrs. Nancy's sweets and freshly ground coffee. People went up to the second floor to admire the art exhibition, where Emily's drawings stood out, telling stories of transformation and hope. "Look at this," commented an elderly lady, pointing to one of Emily's drawings. "It's exactly how I remember the bakery when I was a child." Among the guests, a group of children from the recently created social project by Helen distributed small breads decorated with colored ribbons, an old tradition that Grandma Rose had suggested reviving. "This is how you build a future," said Helen, observing the scene with teary eyes, honoring the past while embracing the new. In the midst of the celebration, Emily noticed that Ethan had disappeared for a moment. She found him in the small garden at the back, where a flower bed had been planted in honor of everyone who was part of that story. "Everything okay?" she asked, approaching. "Better than okay," he replied, smiling. "I was just thinking about how life comes full circle. A few months ago, I came here with the intention of buying a bakery for a real estate project. I ended up finding much more than that." Emily smiled, perfectly understanding what he meant. Sometimes we need to get lost to find the right path. Back in the main hall, Grandma Rose was calling everyone's attention for a special toast. In her hands, she held a champagne glass that Helen had brought, the same brand they used to serve at the mansion parties. "I want to make a toast," she began, her voice clear and emotional. "Not just to the new bakery, but to everyone who is part of this story. To those who never lost hope, to those who had the courage to start over, to those who believed that love is stronger than any obstacle." The sound of clinking glasses echoed through the environment, accompanied by smiles and some discreet tears. Emily, in her corner, recorded everything in her new sketchbook: the happy faces, the sincere hugs, the looks of hope. Ethan approached from behind, embracing her affectionately. "And so, artist, how does this story end?" Emily turned to him, smiling. "I think it doesn't end. Each ending is just the beginning of a new story." At that moment, as the afternoon sun entered through the bakery windows, creating golden reflections on the walls, Emily realized that her life had transformed into something much greater than she had ever dreamed. It wasn't just about bread and sweets, drawings, or romances. It was about how small acts of love could transform entire lives. And there, surrounded by people who had become much more than characters in her story, Emily knew she had found not just her place in the world, but also her own love story. A story that, like the best of breads, had been made with time, care, and much affection. 6 months after the opening, the Oak Ridge Bakery had become much more than a commercial establishment. It was the beating heart of the neighborhood. The mornings began early, with the aroma of fresh bread attracting the first customers, and ended late, with art and cooking classes on the second floor. On that specific spring morning, Emily was organizing her first individual exhibition in the cultural space. Her graphic novel about the bakery's story had been a surprising success, inspiring other communities to value their own stories. "I never thought I'd see my story in a book," commented Mr. Joe, leafing through a copy of Emily's work. In the pages, his young face mixed with the current one, telling the trajectory of a man who never gave up on his dreams. The cultural space buzzed with activity. Children participated in drawing workshops. Ladies learned confectionery techniques with Mrs. Nancy, and local young artists found a place to exhibit their work. "You know what moves me the most?" said Grandma Rose, observing a class of teenagers who were learning to make whole wheat bread. Seeing how a place can transform so many lives. Helen, who now divided her time between business management and social projects, agreed. "Each person who enters here takes a little hope with them." The neighborhood revitalization project was organically flourishing. Other establishments followed the bakery's example, renovating their spaces but maintaining their essence. The old theater was almost ready to reopen, now as a cultural center that would include not only films but also theater and music. "Look who's here," announced Mrs. Nancy, pointing to the door. It was Richard Mitchell, Ethan's father, in a wheelchair pushed by a nurse. After months of treatment and reflection, he had asked to visit the place his son had helped transform. The silence that followed was loaded with emotion. Helen was the first to approach her ex-husband, her eyes conveying not anger, but a kind of serene understanding. "This place," began Richard, his voice weak but clear, "is much better than any shopping center I could have built." Ethan, who had just arrived, stopped beside his father. The relationship between them was still delicate, but it was being rebuilt little by little, brick by brick, like the bakery itself. "It's not just a business, Dad," said Ethan softly. "It's a place where people find their stories." Emily observed the scene from her little corner in the mezzanine, her pencil dancing on the paper, capturing that moment of reconciliation. In her new drawing, the shadows of the past gradually dissolved, giving way to brighter and more hopeful colors. A small crowd began to form in the bakery. It was time for the special artisanal bread workshop that Mr. Joe offered for free every week. Among the participants was a group of young entrepreneurs interested in learning not only recipes, but also the secret of building a business with soul. "The secret," explained Mr. Joe while kneading the dough with his experienced hands, "isn't just in the ingredients. It's in the love you put into everything you do." Grandma Rose, seated in her special chair, knitted a new scarf while observing the movement. Her eyes shone to see how her old workplace, the Mitchell Mansion, was being transformed into a school of arts and crafts for neighborhood youth. "Sometimes," she said to Emily, who had come down to bring her a coffee, "life has a funny way of fixing things. What seemed like a sad story ended up turning into something so beautiful. Emily smiled, thinking about how her own life had changed. From a young woman who hid her drawings under the bed, she had become a recognized artist, inspiring others to tell their own stories. "You know what enchants me the most?" asked Ethan, approaching with a package in his hands. "How you manage to see beauty in everything." He handed the package to Emily. Inside was an old album, carefully restored. "I found it in the mansion archives. They're old photos of the neighborhood since its foundation. I thought you could use them for your next story." Emily leafed through the album with reverence, her hands caressing the pages yellowed by time. Each photo told a story. Each face captured had its own narrative to share. The sun was setting on another day at the Oak Ridge Bakery, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink that reminded of Mrs. Nancy's sweets. Emily was in her favorite place in the mezzanine, putting the finishing touches on a new series of drawings, when Ethan came up with 2 cups of coffee. "I thought we could celebrate," he said, placing the cups on the table. "I just received confirmation. The theater restoration project was approved and work starts next month." Emily smiled, taking her cup. The familiar aroma of Mr. Joe's special coffee filled her senses, bringing memories of that first time Ethan had entered the bakery, pretending to be just another customer. "Who would have thought that scare at the theater would bring us here?" she commented, observing the movement below. The bakery was full, as it always was in the late afternoon. Grandma Rose was conducting a group of children in a storytelling session, her words weaving tales about courage, hope, and new beginnings. Helen and Richard, who now participated in the company's social activities whenever his health allowed, were discussing new projects for the neighborhood. "Look at this," called Mr. Joe from downstairs, showing a special batch of bread. "I managed to recreate that old recipe Mrs. Helen brought, but with a special touch." The delicious smell rose to the mezzanine, making Emily and Ethan smile. It was amazing how a simple bread could carry so many stories, so many memories. "Emily," said Ethan softly, taking her hand, "you changed my life, you know, not just mine, but that of an entire community." She blushed slightly, squeezing his hand. "It wasn't just me, we all changed each other. That's what happens when people allow themselves to dream together." Downstairs, Mrs. Nancy was beginning her evening confectionery art class. Among her students was Peter's daughter, Mr. Joe's granddaughter, who had inherited her grandfather's talent for cooking. "The future is in good hands," commented Helen, who had come up to join them. In her arms, she carried a copy of Emily's graphic novel, now translated into several languages. "Your story is inspiring people all over the world." Emily took her sketchbook, the same one Ethan had given her on the day of the opening, and began to sketch the scene before her. On the page, the soft lines captured not just the people, but also the dreams, the hopes, and the love that filled that space. "You know what enchants me the most," said Grandma Rose, who had also come up to join the group. "How everything fit together perfectly, as if it were a big puzzle that destiny was assembling." Ethan smiled, embracing Emily from behind as she drew. "It wasn't destiny, Grandma Rose. It was the courage of people who chose to make a difference, who didn't give up even when everything seemed impossible." The doorbell rang one last time that day, announcing the arrival of another group of local young artists. They came for the weekly meeting of the cultural project, bringing their own stories, their own dreams to share. Emily closed her sketchbook, looking at all those people who had become her family. Each of them was a special character, in a story that continued to be written day after day, with the same dedication with which Mr. Joe prepared his bread every morning. "And this story?" asked Ethan, pointing to the notebook. "How does it end?" Emily smiled, her gaze traveling through the space that had become much more than a simple bakery. It was a place where dreams came to life, where past and present met to create a sweeter future. "This story," she replied, her eyes shining, "it doesn't end. It continues to be written every day, in each smile, in each hug, in each small gesture of love. Because the best stories are those we live, not just those we tell." And so, as night gently fell over the Oak Ridge neighborhood, the bakery continued its work of feeding not